Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Coverage Inc.'s Pro Webinar Series. And with me, as always, are Jim. Good morning, Jim.
Good morning, planet Earth.
And Anna. Hi, Anna.
Hi, everybody.
And we have a special guest today, Sal Cardoni. Good morning, Sal.
Good morning.
Yay. So, Sal, tell us a little bit about yourself because there is a reason you are our special guest today.
Yes. Well, I have an MFA in screenwriting from LMU. I was a coverage guy for many, many years, read and done coverage thousands of times. But as of 2 weeks ago, I will be in the Writers Guild of America because my writing partner and I sold a pitch to Paramount Studios, a high concept, low budget horror pitch.
Nice.
Yay.
Awesome. Congratulations. And yes, so today we will talk about what is a spec, how do you sell your spec, how does the game work, what do you do if you have a pitch. And to get started, let's start with what is a feature spec, because not everything necessarily classifies as a feature spec. Now, Jim, what exactly do I mean by that?
Well, a feature spec. Well, first of all, by the way, Sal, we'll go into a lot more details about your deal and ask you questions about that, like
Sure.
in the second half of this.
Of course.
Okay, so feature spec. So basically, anything that you write on your own that you're not being paid for, you're writing on spec, which includes, even if you're working or working with a producer or a manager, you're writing something for them, with them, based on their ideas, which happens a lot. You have to do a lot of writing for free in this business. That's all writing on spec, but that's not what we're talking about. In this case, a spec, as we're referring to it, is something that is created to be sent out to sell to the industry. It could be a pilot or it could be a feature. And this is something that goes out into what is traditionally referred to as the spec market. And you're trying to basically get a lot of attention in a very short period of time, hopefully, whip up some interest. At the very least, introduce you to the town, but at the most, possibly sell it for, six figures against seven figures and launch your career.
So let's talk about why these specific genres are on the list or are not on the list. So what we have as a feature spec, we have action. So basically here we have the evergreens to a certain extent. Now action, Jim or Anna or Sal, it must be fresh. Now what do we mean by it must be fresh?
Well, so I mean, there's a lot of staleness in the action genre. There's a lot of staleness in a lot of genres, frankly. I think that note could probably apply to anything. But let me preface this category by saying the reason that I wrote what is a feature spec means this is what agents and managers are looking for a piece of material that they generally feel they can take out into the marketplace and sell and get some heat on. It doesn't mean that if you have written something in a genre that is not on this list or on the what is not a spec list that it's impossible. It just means this is generally what they prefer because they feel that there's some traction, some market interest in these. This is what's hot at this given time, and this is what tends to be hot. So what is fresh? Like if you're going out and you're pitching yet another Die Hard variant, you're probably not going to get anywhere because that is as stale as it can possibly be. If you're pitching a terrorist movie where it's Muslim terrorists and they're doing something that we've just seen a million times before, it's boring. It's not fresh. We've all seen that before. Action movie writers are really kind of up against the wall trying to come up with new and intriguing ways of doing action movies. But if you can do it, if you can reinvent the genre, you'll definitely have something people want to pay attention to.
Yeah, let me quickly jump in here because all of us have read like thousands, tens of thousands possibly of scripts. And so Anna or Sal, jump in here. How often does it happen when we see a programmer being something that's, it's fine, but it doesn't bring anything new to the table. So you read a programmer and you know exactly every story beat after reading the first 2 pages.
All the time. I think that It was a phrase I used to do when I was covering, and also when I still teach screenwriting. That if I can stand on page 10 and pull out my binoculars and guess the 30, the 60, the 90 beats, and be right, then you probably don't have anything. Because we've seen these movies before. We've seen Die Hard in a whatever, Die Hard in a submarine, Die Hard on a plane, Die Hard in a I don't know. I guess to answer your question would be almost never do those specs sell. The other thing is they're very expensive, likely, probably.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, one thing what you can and should do if you have something that you think works well, look at it and make sure, look at everything, look at the setup, the premise, the characters, and really think about if you've maybe seen them before. And if you have, do the opposite,
Yeah, do the
basically.
opposite.
Do
Yeah,
the
go in the
opposite.
opposite. Yeah, I always say exactly that. If you know the structure and know what is expected, and you can say because you've seen this happen in other movies or TV shows or whatever, that you can anticipate that this is going to happen, go in the exact opposite direction and find a way to make it work. You may have to bend over into a pretzel a little bit, but if you can do that and really surprise people, you may have something.
Absolutely. All right, let's look at some of the different genres because there are a few genres that have exceptions. So, for example, what we sometimes see, and it's really heartbreaking, is if people write a script and spend a lot of time writing a script using a copyrighted character. Or a copyrighted story. So, in other words, something that they won't be able to do anything with, and they don't know, which happens a lot, that they should get the rights if they want to write something. That would be one of the big exceptions, like we have book or comic book adaptations with the rights. And also, by the way, quick aside, if you find something awesome, even if you're not represented, hey, find out who wrote this something awesome and just get in touch with them or their representatives. If it's something that's not well known, I mean, any bestseller that comes out the movie rights will have already been sold by the time it comes out. However, if it's something that's not very well known, there is nothing stopping you from simply saying, hey, I love your work. Can I adapt it for the screen? I'll pay you whatever, $500 for the option. And it's usually one of those you pay them some money, but you have to get something going within a certain period of time, 2, 3, 4 years. So that's usually how those deals work. But you too, even as an unrepresented person, can do that.
Yeah, it's amazing. Novelists, they generally have a back catalog, which includes a couple of not as well-known novels, and you'd be surprised if you reach out to them what you might be able to get optioned. Every year we get scripts in that we're surprised are adaptations of big time writers. Like, oh, I never knew that they wrote that. So that's a great place to start to look for material. But let's just hit these categories real quick. I'd like to hear everybody's comments on each of these, and also if any of you guys have any things that we missed here in terms of what you think are popular, what people should be writing as specs. Remember, this is what we're talking about. Please chime in. So, crime and heist. Anna, this is a good genre, I think, for people to spec out. There always seems to be interest in these.
There is. It's the perennial genre. It plays well overseas, which sounds like something as a new writer might not have to worry about, but it's something that people think about when projects get sold. It's one of the few genres that really translates pretty much everywhere.
Uh,
The problem with it is that it is, unless you have something really original like True Detective or something like that, it can be really hard to find a fresh take on it. It's because it has so many familiar beats.
Mhm.
Finding some angle that everyone hasn't seen a million times can be really challenging. I mean, we read a lot of these, and I got to say, it is one of the most repetitive of the genre. you
True
know,
enough. But
uh,
when done right, you generally have something that can be done
yeah,
semi-affordably with interesting characterizations, and so that's got inherent at high stakes. So those things combine to make something that's inherently appealing, and they are generally rewarded at the box office when done
right.
well.
I think the most popular genre on here is actually horror. If you're a new writer and you want to break in with something, horror
Yes.
movies still like they're made by the bucket loads. There's endless variations. You can get away with a lot of weird, which is great. That's probably the easiest way in. I mean, most of the working writers that I know started out on the horror
Sal, you
side.
just sold a horror project.
That's
So
right.
what do you
I
think
did.
about that?
I would completely 1,000% agree. That is the way in. Yeah, we'll get into it a little bit later, but our thing is very high concept and very low budget, basically 3 rooms. And you see the movie as soon as you hear the kind of the log line. And we kind of got in because we had another high concept, low budget horror thing that got us kind of, I guess they call it a calling card script, you know?
Yep,
Probably
Right.
talk about that.
whenever, you want me to talk about it? We can talk about it later, I guess, if you want.
Yeah, we have a whole category on that.
Okay, great. Yeah, I would. And horror doesn't travel overseas as well as some action stuff, but it does travel well. I guess boo in any language, right?
Right.
Yeah, that's a good one. All right, let's quickly talk about the two-hander or buddy movie, and then we have a question about comedy. So, what do we have to say about a two-hander or buddies movie? So I think we have to explain the term.
Sure. That simply means that there are 2 lead roles. I mean, Lethal Weapon set the paradigm, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a buddy movie. A two-hander could just simply be 2 strong roles in any genre. It traditionally applies to action or thriller, but really it could be anything. And the reason that these are liked as specs is because there's 2 good, strong roles to attach actors to, makes it much more likely to get a studio to bite. Also, it's just one of those things that the industry likes. They like to have 2 characters playing off against each other. Generally, these characters are diametrically opposed. For 2 people from opposite worlds forced to work together, fish out of water, stuff like that.
All right, so let's get to comedy because we have a couple of questions about comedy already. So first question, what are the common characteristics of the comedies that work as spec scripts?
There is only one characteristic, and that is the comedy comes out of character. All other kinds of comedy are not in favor and have not been in favor for years. You could have a brilliant broad comedy. You could have slapstick comedy. You could have they're just no one's interested. But if you have a comedy where it's basically extremely well-drawn character, where the comedy is coming out of their quirks or the way they're interfacing with other really well-drawn but really different characters, or put into a plot that's quasi-absurdist but still realistic, that's what people are interested in. And if it can be done with wit and panache. And even so, by the way, comedy is still a really hard sell, mainly because people have such different tastes, wildly different tastes in comedy. And you could do a cold reading of a script where nobody laughs, and you could do a cold reading of the same script with a different audience where people are falling all over themselves. And that is the inherent problem with comedy.
Yeah, let me just quickly jump in here. Also, the thing is, what's very important nowadays is overseas sales, because there is no more DVD market. The DVD market is dead. So a lot of the money that movies make come from selling them into overseas territories. And the thing with comedy in general is that sense of humor differs from culture to culture, so it doesn't necessarily travel very well. And then we have a related comedy question, which is, why aren't rom-coms considered spec? What are they then?
So the reason that rom-coms are down on the what is not a spec list is because for a long time they were really out of favor. They're starting to come back a little bit, particularly thanks to TV and movies like Trainwreck and The Big Sick. But even so, they have to have just I mean, Anna, you can talk a little bit about this. I mean, you know a lot about those genres.
Let me talk about comedy too, just because I think here's where we start getting a slight disconnect between TV and features. I mean, I think a feature like full-length feature comedy is really, really hard to pitch on spec. Whereas I think, if you've got a great comedy pilot, that'll get you a manager. It's just
right.
The TV writers, because they're still sort of semi-divided into half-hour writers and full-hour writers. The half-hour comedy is still something that's very much in demand. But I think you're right. I mean, they're all character comedies. You're not going to be getting, sort of the older style slapstick things today. As for romantic comedies, I actually think they're coming back in a much bigger way, in a different way than they used to be. I mean, the late 90s, 2000s were like the queen of the Julia Roberts movies. There were thousands of them all over the place. And now what we're getting is a lot more, we're getting a lot of sort of romancy Hallmark Netflix movies, and
Right.
we're getting a lot of little diverse films, which is great. Things like Crazy Rich Asians,
Yeah.
Always Be My Maybe on Netflix.
The Big Sick.
The others whose titles I'm blanking on right now. So I think they're actually coming back. Like that's becoming more of a thing now that the streaming services and cable too is picking up on it. Are seeing that there is the old audience for this is new again. They don't have to spend zillions of dollars to make it a theatrical release when they can just shoot it, put it on Netflix, and have 8 million people see it.
Right. Yeah. Netflix is really the savior when it comes to this, and there always has been an audience for this, but Hollywood kind of forgot this mainly because they bought so damn many spec romantic
Yeah.
comedies back in the '90s and the early double aughts that just sat there and they couldn't do
Yeah,
anything
and
with them, and
part
nobody
of the
went to see
problem
them anymore.
Right, and part of the problem is that it's an insanely difficult genre to write, which always makes people laugh when I say that, but it's absolutely true. The audience for this genre has seen everything. They know every beat. And so finding a way to make it feel fresh is really, really hard. So if you can write a great romantic comedy, more power to you. That's fantastic, but I wouldn't do it. It's really, really hard.
Yeah. So okay, so thrillers, there always tends to be an audience for thrillers. Agents and managers like thrillers. I mean, when done well, they're very
Yeah.
difficult to write. It's very difficult to write well. I mean, basically, you've got to get your twists in. They've got to be believable. Again, there's got to be something fresh to it. True story sports movies. This is a real tough one because lots of people like to write sports movies, but what you need to understand is the industry does not care unless you are writing about something that is true. If it's an adaptation of an actual person or an actual event, then you're golden. If there's a well-known character or a book or a magazine article, great. But if you're just inventing a team or inventing a boxer or something, nobody really is going to care unless you've got some incredible attachment, or your last name is Zalian. Otherwise, it's a tough one.
Or if it's an offshoot of something that came before, like, the Bad News Bears or any of the Rocky follow-ups or anything like that.
Yeah, I will say this, that I think the best script that I read in 2015 or 2016 was called The Olympian, and it was on the blacklist, written by a playwright. It was about I guess you would call them like what's the Olympic sports? It's kayaking, but it's not kayak. There's a more official name for it. Anyway, and this guy won the gold. He came out of nowhere to beat the Russian. Completely true story, and it was riveting. Wow. And nobody made it because it's a 19 to 30-year-old movie about a kayaker, but it's like completely gripping.
I mean, they can be done. There are some really great examples of that. I mean, it's funny. I don't love sports, but I love sports movies. I think one of my favorites is actually Miracle, the one about the hockey team.
Great movie.
It's a fantastic movie. True story. It's probably like, based on 2 articles or something like that, and one, 15-minute piece of television.
I think, Jim, was it you who told me this phrase or somebody else in Hollywood? But oftentimes studios and buyers are looking for not a great script, but the right script, and that distinction for them is very key. I think Disney was looking. That's a right script for Disney. It's a very Hallmark Disney ending, where the underdogs defeat the Russians.
Right.
And in fact, that I see that a lot. It's like, I can't believe I didn't like such and such a script, but it was the right script for the right company at the right time.
Yeah.
Right.
Timing is everything, and
Timing is everything.
All right, let's finish out what is a feature spec, because the last one is actually very interesting. Anything that uses well-known source material in an interesting new way. And so let me just jump in and talk about source material a bit. Like, as I'm sure you've noticed, IP is the big buzzword these days because everyone wants source material. So again, if there is something, you can't do anything if you do not have the rights. But another way to go about having source material is, number one, go through public domain materials. And
Yes.
there's sometimes awesome stuff, and you don't have to pay for it. You can adapt it. It's in the public domain. As an example, I believe, since we were talking horror before, I believe all of H.P. Lovecraft is public domain.
Yes, it is.
So just, just look at something like that and create
Right.
your own IP, your own source material.
I mean,
Yeah.
I also think that you can take, you can negate some of this what is not a spec categories by using source material as well.
Yeah.
If you have a really great novel that happens to be a period piece, you're going to get more traction with it, by telling that story because it has that backup of source material.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, if you adapt a Jane Austen novel or something that hasn't been done, if one exists, you're probably going to get some interest, even though it's a period drama.
Yeah, or if you find just a new way to do it. If you dump Pride and Prejudice into a political drama, that would be so cool. I would watch that. So
Yeah, or you take the bones of the story and the framework and set it in a post-apocalyptic, future or today,
Right,
frankly.
exactly.
Yeah.
If you mix things up, like all these rules, as with everything in Hollywood, it's yes and no. Like if you mix these up a little bit, there's a lot of stuff you can do. So I always feel bad because people are like, don't write fantasy. I'm like, well, I like writing fantasy. You just have to be smart about it, and really be aware of what you're getting into.
So let's look at this. Why not a spec? What is not a spec? And you guys, just everybody kind of chime in. Let's just go real quick down the list. Why don't you think, in general, the industry, and again, this is just in general, there are exceptions to all of these, but why do you think the industry won't be interested in each of these? Let's start with animation. As a spec.
It's so expensive.
Colossally expensive. Yep.
Yeah.
And also it's created in-house. Everyone,
yes.
Pixar, they have their brain trust. Everyone creates their own stuff in-house. They really don't go to outside writers for animation.
Yeah, very rare that an animation spec will actually sell and get made. I can't even think of a time when it was. I have heard of a few that have sold, that have gotten set up. But if you do have a good animation spec, it can work as a calling card.
The other thing is just how many buyers are there? There's DreamWorks and Pixar, right?
No, there's more than that now. There's because with television, there's so much.
Oh, sorry, right? Yeah, I forgot.
Yeah, Sony has their own animation arm, and
yeah. But it's still really hard to do it it's still mostly done in-house.
Yeah. Westerns.
They're period pieces, so they're expensive. They're also one of those genres that never really goes away, but you're more likely to see them done as indies than you are as a spec sale.
Yeah, they'll always make westerns. Every year another western or two comes out and gets released and dies a quick, sad, painful death at the box office, and everybody's like, oh well, there goes. I guess the western's still not coming back. They're just kind of out of favor now.
Yeah, they're out of favor. I'm reminded of what Steven Spielberg called one of the best scripts he ever read, which was Scott Frank, who's a genius writer, Godless. Right, took 12 years to get made, and they made it a TV show.
Yeah.
So that's Scott Frank, Steven Spielberg's green light, and they still had to do a Netflix TV show because, frankly, I think in today's Me Too woke culture, which I'm very for, I don't know if writing about toxic masculinity, which is kind of what the Western was, I guess in a sense, is in favor now. That could be a reason why.
I think I think it's how you do it. But yeah, I think if you have a Western spec, you can go back and repurpose it as a pilot. You probably have a better chance at it. It's still
great.
It's still going to be really hard to get through the door, though.
Okay, let's move on because we have another comedy question since our next item here is most comedies. So we have a question regarding comedies. Can you provide an example of a character-driven comedy versus a slapstick comedy movie? So can we think of any examples? Slapstick versus versus character-driven comedy.
If you have a Pink Panther-esque movie that, well, actually, you know what? I'm gonna hedge my bets on that one because the character was so well drawn in that movie. but it was physical comedy. I mean, basically, we're talking pratfalls, we're talking, topping the topper, as Blake Edwards used to call it, where it really was about, just crazy physical comedy, and then you top that bit of crazy physical comedy with something nobody saw coming. Actually, if you could probably do that in a really brilliant way, you probably get some attention. Again, there's exceptions to all this, but in general, physical comedy or those types of movies where that is sort of the purpose of the whole thing, not going to get a lot of of attention. Even like a Monty Python style absurdist comedy where it's incredibly witty on the page, but still there's just a lot of crazy out there visual humor. It's really tough to get people. Everyone in Hollywood has ADD. Nobody has the patience to sit down and actually like really absorb something. Rarely
Right.
something will slip through.
I
Um,
mean,
one of you guys give me a good example of a good character-based comedy.
see, I can think of tons of them on television. I'm trying to think of features. I mean, TV's got, Brooklyn Nine-Nine is great. Good
Yeah,
Place is, there's a gazillion of them on TV.
on TV, The Office, it's yeah,
Yeah.
stuff like that.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
great. Features. What was the last time I went to see a comedy at the theater?
yeah, it's rough. Yeah, so which kind of proves the point, really.
Yeah, all my examples are like 5 years old. I mean,
All right.
super bad comes to mind because I love that movie.
Oh yeah.
But
Okay.
that's very character driven, and it's, that's what you
Oh,
remember. Really good movie.
The Hangover. The Hangover was,
Oh yeah.
really really strong characters. It's probably the
Mhm.
last big comedy franchise I can think of, really. But really strong characters put into an increasingly absurdist setting, but still stays quasi grounded and believable throughout, mainly because we buy into and believe the characters.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, let's go through the other genres. We have slasher or serial killer horror.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
They're done. There's just been a lot
Yeah.
of them.
Yeah,
The
you
yeah,
the
yeah.
torture porn phase is over and been over for a while.
Yeah, I mean, I think the reason something like Get Out did so well is that it's just so different and so interesting, and it had so much to say. Whereas, like your random Freddy Krueger, Saw, blah 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 blah. I mean, they're fun, but there's just been a ton of them. It's really hard to find something.
They're empty calories. Yeah.
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 Yeah, and also these are done on a lower budget. If we're talking a spec that you're sending out into the marketplace, a horror script generally is going to have, big visual elements, which usually is going to mean supernatural.
Hmm.
I mean, it could be monster, but even the monster needs to be really new, fresh, and creative. There needs to be something about it that's going to bring more to it than just simply being a horror movie. Like A Quiet Place is a great example. That was
Yes.
four quadrant. It was a monster movie, but brought a whole new way of telling the story, a whole new language to it, which is basically the language of quiet and silence.
Yep.
And brought a whole family into the situation and did it as PG-13. So those are all ways of reinventing the genre, and massive hit and brilliant movie.
Hmm.
Right.
All right, moving on to ensembles. Yes, do not write Gosford Park.
No.
Oh, God, please don't. Yeah. There's this tendency right now, in TV, all the TV writers who are listening, there's this tendency right now that everybody wants to write the next Game of Thrones, which is great. That's very ambitious, but please don't, because it's so hard. It's so hard to do, and it's so hard for readers to get through. And the last thing you want is for some reader to pick it up and say, there are 24 characters in the first 10 minutes of this show. I'm not reading any farther.
Yeah.
Um,
We're seeing a lot of
Yeah.
scripts
Just
like those,
yeah.
completely
titles
stay
like
away.
those.
Yeah. There's a lot of them.
Yeah, bear in mind that the reason that Game of Thrones was such a huge success was because of the massive body of successful novels that it was based upon. And some would maintain that when they ran out of novels to adapt, the series fell off a cliff in season
Hmm.
7 and 8.
Yeah,
So,
and that's not to say that you can't have a show that has a lot of characters, but you need to sort of approach it. You have to approach it like a tree, where you're building. You start from a small base, and then you build up and gradually, create more branches and create more story threads and characters and things like that. And
yeah,
if you start at the beginning with this huge character dump and try to have all of them,
It's impossible. And the analogy is if you go to a party where you've met nobody, in the first 10 minutes at the party, you're introduced to and you're given the name of 10 different people. Go into the backyard and repeat back to the person that introduced you to them all 10 names. You can't do it. It's
Right.
impossible. It's human nature.
Right.
You don't know it. And therefore, when it's 2 characters a page, the first 7 pages, it's like, is John Fred's cousin or is Fred married to Jane? You don't know, and therefore you're confused, and then like Jim said earlier, there's no timing, no attention span, and then the script gets tossed in the garbage.
Right.
Absolutely. All right, let's, because we have quite a few more questions regarding genres, so let's just go through the what is not a spec list, and then let's get to the questions. So dramas. Why do we not like dramas?
Just a real tough sell. They're not rewarded at the box office. Again, we're generally talking features. On the TV side, dramas, absolutely, if you've got a good drama, of course.
Yeah, period pieces.
Expensive,
Okay,
again, if not adapted from a novel.
yeah, I love period pieces. Again, they're getting easier to sell on TV, but they're still really tough. It helps if they have source material. It helps if they
Also, labor intensive to write because you have to get the dialogue period specific, which is just
so hard. Like the only show that has really nailed
would
that
never be
as a
part of
reason is The
1830s
Terror.
London.
Yeah.
The advice that I've gotten about period pieces, since
Yep.
I love writing them, and that tends to be my wheelhouse, is you know, I am trying really hard to find elements of history that I can bring into the present and sort of revamp, which is sort of similar to take Jane Austen and write it in the present idea.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, we always tell people who like to write dramas and period dramas in particular, see if you can take those skills and use them to tell a contemporary story.
Yeah. Political drama, unless you're doing House of Cards.
Unless you're Aaron Sorkin, just don't do it.
Yeah,
Yes.
they don't travel. People outside the U.S. just generally not interested in movies that have anything to do with American politics, and that makes them, even if they're a great story, it makes them inherently tough to do as a spec.
And frankly, no matter what you came up these days, real life is stranger than fiction. So, you
Yes.
know, I doubt you would get anything
Right.
revelatory.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's true. We've
All
already
right.
talked about sports.
Yep.
Although I would say there's a caveat to those fictional sports movies. You can write about kids. If you're writing
Yeah.
kids sports movies, that's different.
Okay.
Right. Experimental movies.
And nonlinear movies, we can kind of lump them together.
Yeah.
You know, look, it's pretty obvious. We're talking about, you know, making hamburgers, and you know, we're not talking about grilling, you know, an $80 steak. This is basically what agents and managers are looking for in specs. They're looking for something that can be, you know, bought and digested by 300 million people. They don't want something that's a narrow cast type proposition.
Right.
Yeah.
Non-IP superhero movies, we've talked about these in our webinars in the past. Just don't, please. There's so many branded superhero projects out there. If agents or if the industry wants to make a superhero project, they're just going to go option one. They don't need you to create an original one. That said, occasionally something will break through. But I was surprised to learn that even The Boys, which we're enjoying on Amazon, is an adaptation. I can't think, you know, I think Super with Rainn Wilson was the last original superhero project that I've seen. That was like 6-7 years ago.
There was a spec that sold maybe 18 months ago, which had a really great premise, which was there was this superhero who, you know, has to go through a building to save a couple people, and something falls down and kills some mother's kid, and it's her story about trying to find him and kill him because he accidentally killed her son. But that's like
we lost you there, Sal.
I think
that has elements of a superhero, and see how that's familiar but different.
Yeah.
Right.
So, sorry.
There are definitely a few.
Exactly.
There are a few little indie type, you know, elements surrounding the superhero world movies that I've seen, kind of either just kind of making their way through the ranks. But again, really, really hard. Same thing with fantasy. Don't write non-IP fantasy if you can avoid it.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've already talked about most romantic comedies. So let's go through a couple of questions quickly. So first question, my spec is mixed genre using fantasy, buddy, mystery. Is this a not?
I'm interested. If done well, I think that could be kind of cool. As usual, you're going to be butting up against people's, hesitations when it comes to budget. So it depends, how much we're talking about in terms of fantasy. But if it's really clever and mashed together in an original way, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing to remind everybody too is just that a great script is a great script. Even
Yeah.
if you cannot sell that script can get you work.
Right.
My favorite story is actually Travis Beacham, who wrote Carnival Row. The original
Yeah.
spec script, it was originally a feature, and the original spec is fantastic. And nobody would make it. It was huge. It was impossible. It was this weird hybrid of genres. And now, 15 years later, it's a series on Amazon. You
Yeah. And
know,
by the way, if you haven't seen it, see it. It's good.
yeah, it's one of those things where just if you've got a crazy idea, it may not sell, and you should be aware of that. That's part of like the Hollywood rejection element, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't have use. You just need to decide how much bandwidth you want to devote to any given project.
Yeah, and anything that doesn't sell, if you can get it out there into the marketplace, becomes a calling card, which brings us
Right.
to.
Well, hang on. We have a couple of more questions.
Oh, okay. I'm trying to move it along because it's
I
already 2:37.
know, I
Right.
know. Okay, so we have what do we think of Bad Moms, Horrible Bosses, and The Hangover? All of those seem more premise driven than, say, character driven. How do we feel about those movies? Do
I
we
don't.
think that, yeah?
I don't think so. I mean, Bad Mom. I love Bad Moms. God, that movie's funny. I think it's an incredibly character-driven story. I mean, just because it's character-driven doesn't mean that it doesn't have slapsticky elements to it. It just means that those aren't the main source of why we're watching the movie. Like if the movie still has something to say and still has strong characters in it, that's going to be what stands out more so.
Absolutely. And here we have a great example of action comedy. Jumanji, Welcome to the Jungle.
Yeah,
Yeah,
also an adaptation.
yeah.
Yep.
Uh,
And then we have a couple of more questions. Anthony, we will get to your question a little bit later because we have a few more slides that might actually answer your question. Then we have interesting question. Ideal budget range for a spec.
Ooh.
you want to keep it in something that can be done by the largest amount of producers. Now, that doesn't mean you can't write a big sci-fi spec. You can. It just means that bear in mind you're going to have a very small amount of people that could potentially buy it. So, for the sweet spot for a spec is something that can be done for like 20 to 50 million. Not maybe a couple of big set pieces, but not more than like two or three. But for the most part, something that can be done relatively inexpensively. And then if they add a star, then maybe it'll go, or star or two or three, then maybe it'll go up to 70 to 100 million. But just inherently in and of itself, something that is relatively contained, it doesn't really matter what genre it is. That basically that rule applies to pretty much everything.
Okay, one more question. Is it worth it for older writers to write specs, or should we focus on writing stuff we self-produce?
Wow,
Oh
that's a
God.
great question. We're going to talk a little bit about DIY in a little bit. I would just say, ageism is real. There is no question about it. If you send out your spec and and you get a meeting, which is great, and you walk into the room and everyone sitting there is 24 years old or 26 years old, and you're 70, there's a divide there that is going to be really tough to come back from because these people like to work with their peers. It's just human nature. So there's that. That said, if your voice is so bracing and cool and fresh that they can't tell how old you are, and you come into that room and you carry yourself like the cool voice on the page and you're that guy or that gal, then you know what? Maybe you've got a shot. It's a question of kind of transcending your own age, I feel. But DIY should always be an option because why wait around for Hollywood to give you money if you have the ability to do it yourself?
Right. Not to mention that with age comes experience, and a lot of times that can carry you through as well. Someone who comes across as really knowing what they're doing and not looking like they just got out of college, that's a plus.
I found that writers of a certain age, and I'm 55 myself, so I'm getting there too. But I find that writers of a certain age tend to use that as an excuse in a way. Like, I'm 70, so therefore, I don't know the lingo, I don't know how teens speak, or to me that's bullshit. I think it doesn't matter if you're 95. If you're a keen observer of human nature, and you should be able to write a kick-ass piece of material.
Yeah, the guy who wrote the King's Speech was 73.
There you
Yeah,
go.
when he won the Oscar, he gave he made a shout out to his age. He said something like, "I guess it's never too late to get up
That's
here." It was
right.
very touching and emotional. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
if you have something to say, keep writing.
Yeah.
That's
Exactly.
Absolutely. In general, what does optioning a spec screenplay mean in the era of Netflix? Very good question.
What does optioning a spec mean in the era of Netflix?
I think what he means is since Netflix is such a huge content provider as well as buyer of content, what's the difference in importance? I'm assuming that's what you mean, Frank. If you don't, just
so he's
feel
talking
free
about
to.
optioning TV. I'm guessing that's what it sounds like.
Well,
Um,
I was reading it as meaning since Netflix buys so much, are the studios even important anymore?
Well,
uh,
Netflix is
yeah,
a studio for all intents and
right.
purposes. Netflix is a buyer. All the big streaming services are buyers. The fact that they are buying, I mean, as of Sundance last year, they eclipsed the amount of projects that Paramount and Disney and everybody else was buying. So yeah, they're big buyers. They're looking for features. They're looking for TV. There is no difference, as far as I can tell, unless somebody knows something about Netflix's business practices that I don't know.
Well, what I've heard is that, well, actually, I just had this conversation with somebody that they're buying such an enormous amount of material. They're not necessarily buying with the intent to produce. A lot of it is just acquisition, and also like they don't pay as well as network does. You're going to make more money selling your script to CBS than you will to Netflix,
Okay,
which I thought was
good to
very
know.
interesting. But apparently, there are still a few little nitpicky rules that apply that allow them to do that. So it's something to keep in mind if somebody offers you a sale.
So, so the question is about an option, and look, options are fine if no one's going to buy your script outright, but someone is willing to give you an option, as long as it's not a chump change or bullshit option like a $1 option. Never do those. They're not worth your time. But if it's a real money option from a real company or a real player, yeah, of course. Why wouldn't you consider doing that? It gets you into the room. You can then follow it up and then pitch other projects, which we'll get to in just a moment, and potentially establish yourself in that way. It's something that
Right.
could potentially lead to you getting signed. If you haven't been already, you're probably already signed to even get in the room in the first place. But yeah, way to get you an agent or a manager, and a way to potentially get you working and establish relationships with these people.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, this is how it is supposed to work, but doesn't most of the time.
So
So
let's
this
go.
is, yes,
Yeah,
go through it. Go ahead.
let's go through this real quick. So, how it's supposed to work: you write a killer piece of material. Okay, now there's a lot more to it than just that, and there might be years that go into it. Let's say you've made it to draft 27. You've got your killer piece of material. You find a passionate producer who brings aboard a manager, or you find a manager who brings aboard a passionate producer. Those are usually the two paths in. There are other ways, but generally speaking, if you're just out fishing about, it's either going to be a producer who you find who really sparks to your material and is willing to work with you, do a few drafts with you, and then make a few phone calls for you and get you in the door at a manager or an agent, or it'll be the manager who does that, because managers are the ones who generally find and nurture new talent. It's not generally going to be agents. They're usually the last people to come aboard because really they're just salesmen. Um, then the manager and producer or producer bring aboard the agent to complete the team, and then your project goes out to the marketplace. Your team sends out the material. They will generally choose to do that either to a small handful of buyers to kind of test the waters if they're not 100% sure about what they've got, or if it's more specialized piece of material. Or they'll go out wide if they think they've really got something, and it's a big, it's an action movie, or it's something that's got a really broad panoply of potential buyers. Your team then fields multiple offers from multiple people who really want your project and want to bring it aboard, and then your spec sells for an enormous amount of money. You take meetings all over town, which we call the bottled water tour, and you've established and launched your career. That's how it's supposed to work. Yay, congratulations, you.
Yes, most of the time, of course, it doesn't work like that, which is what we'll come to on the next slide. But before we do, we have a quick question about are new writers being picked up by agents during the standoff between the WGA and agents? What do we know about? Are they actually signing new clients? I doubt it right now. Or are they trying to simply sign non-WGA writers? What's going on?
Sal, do you have any perspective on this?
I would say that they are likely probably doing it under the table, and they're reading, and because the other thing is they don't know if some of their clients will come back, right? So maybe they've lost 10% of their clients. I would guess that they're not saying they're doing it, but they're probably doing it, and that when this thing ends, they can just sign the top 3 Nichols winners. Oh, well, how'd you get to me? Oh, well, I was talking to you for 6 months.
Yep.
That's my guess.
Yep.
I mean, it's tricky though, because if they want, you can't. Those writers eventually will have to join the guild one way or another. So I would imagine it's probably not happening as much as people think it is.
Yeah,
I would say managers are probably doing it. Definitely managers.
Yeah. So what I've heard is that right, managers are apparently under the table calling up agents if they need help with something. And some agents might be receptive to that and others are not right now. So that's what I hear anyway.
Oh, yeah. So just to preface, all of this stuff that we're talking about is generally, when the industry is working. Right now, it's been dysfunctional for about a year now, and looks like it's going to stay dysfunctional for a little while. But we're talking about, how things generally work.
Yes, and speaking of how it actually works, and before we get to that, we have a quick question about idea theft. So the question is there actually an issue in Hollywood with idea theft by producers after you pitch your script? If so, how do you protect yourself?
I don't think there is. I think any reputable, there might be stealing a little flavoring, but nobody's stealing the entire meal.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. I mean,
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was just saying, sure there are plenty of disreputable people out there. I mean, and that's just like, you got to vet who you're working with, no matter who you're working with. I don't think idea theft happens all that often because first of all, it's very hard to steal an idea. You can't copyright an idea. You can copyright a take. Your take on any given thing is what is yours. The actual idea itself is a nebulous thing that anyone can pick up on, which is how we get 400 movies about pirates in the same year.
Right. It doesn't make a lot of sense for most studios or big production companies to steal an idea when they could just simply pay for it and not have to deal with any hassle or legal ramifications. So generally they don't. Of course, there's some bad apples out there, but I will tell you how plagiarism does happen. It generally happens like the way it happened to me, which is you go out and you're pitching projects to people, you have meetings with people, and you give them some ideas, you tell them about your project, and then 2 or 3 years later, a movie comes out and you see some of your ideas that you pitched in the room in that movie that exec helped develop. Now, they may have pilfered that idea deliberately, just thinking, it's just an idea, no one will ever notice, or they might not have even done it deliberately. It could have simply been they thought they had that idea themselves one day, like, hey, I should throw that in there. And that's how these things tend to happen. And you know what? There's very little you can do about that. But that said, every movie that comes out, the studios do plan on a certain amount of lawsuits that are going to come at them for everything. They've got settlement money basically budgeted into everything.
Okay, let's go through how it actually works. And before we do that, quick announcement, since we had this question, yes, you can absolutely, after we've recorded this webinar, we will put it online so you can rewatch it as much as you want. But yes, so how it actually works.
All right, so let's go through this again real quick. So once again, you write a killer piece of material. You struggle forever to get anyone interested. You do the usual stuff: queries, pitch meetings, online pitches, contests, blacklists. Yeah, right. Nothing's happening. At long last, something clicks. Maybe you got a great score on the blacklist, or some contest that you've submitted. That you make the top 5. It's a contest that Hollywood pays attention to. That's very important. Or suddenly you remember that you were roommates in college with CAA VP. That's also kind of important. Your new agent or manager and you do about 6 more drafts over a year's time of the material, losing confidence because the material is no longer new and fresh anymore. Your rep decides, okay, let's not send this out right now. Maybe we can send it out next year after Sundance. Your rep finally decides to test the waters. They send your script out to, well, let's say 3 or 5 producers that they know. What they're doing when they're doing that is to give them plausible. To give them cover. They just want someone else to say, yeah, well, I read it. It wasn't really for me. I did my best. Let's move on. Coincidentally, a new movie. By the way, this is the very snarky and kind of cynical approach to all this. This is all tongue-in-cheek, folks, by the way, but not unrealistic. Coincidentally, a new movie opens with a similar premise to yours and flops. Your script is now dead on arrival. Or a new movie opens with a similar premise and kicks ass. So now everyone's falling all over themselves looking to find something similar, and then they remember your project. And then a producer calls up your rep and says, I want in. Now it's attachment time. After doing 2 or 3 more drafts for the new producer, your team decides to go out to one of the big A-list stars or directors in the world who can get this movie green lit. A year goes by waiting to hear back from these people. Everyone passes. You're dead in the water again. Or producer calls your rep and says, I'm in. There's so much heat on this hit movie. Plus, there's rumblings of a competing project being readied elsewhere that your team starts moving fast and sending out your spec to everyone in town. Over the course of a weekend, your team pulls out all the stops and miraculously manages to attach some huge director who was heretofore unavailable to your project, skipping over the huge queue of projects waiting that people waiting to hear back from that director or actor. And then that Monday, your agent plays all the interested buyers off against each other and tells everyone that they have to submit their offers by close of business or they're out. Your script then sells in a huge deal. Or it doesn't. But you get so much heat on you that you still get the bottled water tour. You get to go around and have 30 meetings all around town, introduce yourself, pitch yourself, and you can work for 5 to 10 years off of that script, which will now become your calling card.
And the short version of that is, it's a marathon, people, not a sprint.
Yep.
All right. So 3 important questions. What is a writing sample or calling card script?
All right. So Sal, you were talking a little bit about this before. What's a calling card?
Calling card script is a script that tells the town what you, and in my case, I have a writing partner, Brian, what we are capable of on the page. Tonally, dialogue, character depth. Generally, it hasn't sold, but it opens every door in town for you. People want to meet you just how good the writing sample is. For us, it was high execution, high concept. It was I can share now what it was.
Yeah, go.
A Catholic nun is called in to perform an exorcism on the son of a Mexican drug lord. So it's The Exorcist meets Narcos. And people love that script because it was set over 48 hours and it's this seemingly demure nun against a Pablo Escobar type, and it goes from there, and it's horrible and escalates. And everybody wants to meet the 2 guys that came up with that thing. And it didn't sell, but it got us, in every room in town, basically.
Well, yeah, fantastic. And that's a great example of, mashing up 2 things that, by themselves, we've kind of seen those elements before, but you put them together and it's new and fresh.
Yep.
So here's an important thing. You need to understand that when a spec goes out to market, a spec feature or a spec pilot, your chances of it selling are actually remote. Agents and managers are hoping for a sale, but at the end of course they are. But at the end of the day, it's going to be 95% or more are not going to sell. The real purpose that they're sending these things out for is to introduce you to the town. And so most specs can become your calling card if they are well received.
Yeah, and let me quickly jump in here because I think a lot of writers still kind of have this idea, oh, I'm going to write a script and then I'm going to sell it in the 6 or 7 figures. And I think that idea came about in the 90s, where really the studios bought absolutely everything from everyone, no matter if it was ready or not, and they just spent money. And but they wised up rather quickly. So those days are
Damn it.
over.
I mean, on the flip side, though, there's also a lot more places that are looking for material. So that can be a plus. You might not make as much money, but you might have a better chance of getting it sold.
Yep,
Yeah.
absolutely. Um, so can I sell the script without an agent or a manager? The answer is yes. A lot of it is about you doing your own legwork. They're going to generally be on a smaller or indie level, but there are a lot of sort of below the radar producers out there who are looking for material that can be done for, 500,000 or a million, 1.5 million, stuff like that. And these producers are not serviced by agents and managers generally. So they don't really have a way to find material. So you'll find these guys on places like Inktip and fishing around online on the boards and stuff and looking for material. So yeah, you can potentially get yourself in the door and get a smaller type deal just by yourself, just on the strength of a good piece of material.
Right. All right. I mean, and actually, this is where that overseas thing comes in as well. I mean, there are producers in Canada and Australia and, in Europe who are definitely
Yes.
looking for material. So just because it's not Hollywood doesn't necessarily mean that it's not legit.
Exactly. Yeah. And in fact, I broke in from selling scripts to Canada, and the company that I was working for then became Lionsgate. So
Oh,
that was how I
Okay.
backdoored into the industry. But yeah, I had sent out back in the 90s a bunch of busted specs. My reps were sending them around. I was with I'm sorry, with Willie Morris at the time, and I had spec after spec go out, and I'd get so close and then they wouldn't sell and nothing was happening. And it was extremely frustrating until all of a sudden this little company in Canada decided to pick up my script called Hauser's Renegades. Hauser's Renegades then was bought by the company that became Lionsgate, and then that led to a 4-picture deal with Lionsgate. So yeah, it's interesting. Don't overlook these smaller or international companies, even if it's a small deal on the surface. You never know where it's going to lead. And by the way, that script Hauser's Renegades also became the basis of the Expendables.
hmm.
20 or so years later. I can't prove it, but it's the exact same concept, and that was my concept. So there you go.
All right, moving on. What do I need to sell my spec? First, of course, a great script or pilot. So I think that's often very difficult for people to understand because, and I say that in every webinar, but it always bears repeating because I know people, you see movies out there or TV shows and the writing is friggin' atrocious. And you're like, well, I can write rings around these people. So why do I have to do 30 drafts to get a consider? Again, 2 sets of rules. Set of rules number one, if you're in other words, your parents, your aunt, your uncle, your brother, your sister is in the industry and they can get you in. It does not matter if you can spell your name, you will work. Set of rules number 2, if you do not have an in, if you do not have the required connections, in other words, you're not good with a nepotism, then yes, you do have to really write a great piece of material that jumps off the page so people can't help but pay attention.
Sad but true. Yep. Yeah, not all of us can be J.J. Abrams, right?
Yeah. God. Anyway. Yes, nepotism. Woo. All right. Next, a manager. The manager will often put the team together and can even send a script out without an agent. In fact, managers in many ways do the exact same thing as an agent. The only thing they cannot do is negotiate a contract, but that's what you would have an entertainment lawyer for.
Yeah, exactly. Now, bear in mind that a lot of managers used to be agents. There was a big shakeout right after the Writers Guild strike around 2009, I guess, and a lot of people started losing their jobs when, the agencies started merging and constricting and stuff, and they hung up shingles. So there's a lot of managers out there who really kind of act like agents. They don't really like develop new writers like the way managers traditionally do. They just call themselves managers. But I mean, those guys they're basically, they've got a lot of hustle and they can get stuff done too. So, but managers traditionally are the ones who find the new talent, nurture the new talent, and then introduce you to the people you need to know. They get the agent. They will recommend an entertainment attorney to you. They will hopefully team you with a producer, or get you in the room with a producer, and even start working with a producer, maybe developing some of those producers' ideas on spec, which they can then go out and sell later down the line.
All right. So great. Then how do I do it?
Well, the first thing to do is to, take the time to make sure the script is the best that it can be. And yes, this will likely take work. We can't stress this enough, but it's just we've seen it over and over again. The last thing you want to do is just pull the trigger too early. Just take the time to get the script right. We all get frustrated because the process often takes longer than we want it to. I understand. I've been there, but nothing is going to be gained from sending out a script that isn't ready yet, except having the door hit you on the ass on the way out.
Absolutely. Okay, so before we get to the next section here, we have a question, which is, I just placed in the 2019 Academy Awards Nickel Fellowship. I was a semi-finalist and one low-level producer contacted me.
Wow.
Only one. So how do I sell my spec? Heck, how do I even get people to read it? This is not my first script or first placement, even in the Nickels. So what should he do?
Well, first of all, congratulations.
Yeah.
Yep.
Go ahead, Anna.
Congratulations.
I was going to say, if you were a semifinalist at Nickel, you can email any management company and say, "Hi, this script was a semifinalist at Nickel. Would you like to read it? Here's the log line." That's pretty much all you need. I mean, that's Nick. There are a handful of really legit contests, but Nickel's still sort of like the high end. Like any placement in the Nickel fellowship will get you a read.
So,
I would find 500 email addresses for managers, and put bold flashing neon signs, semifinalist Nichols, the log line, sincerely yours, Joe Ryder.
Yep.
Yes, that's pretty much all you need to do.
Yeah. Now, so two things. First of all, I got signed by a manager back in the day because I was a Nickel semifinalist. They reached out to me proactively. I can't tell you, there was probably hundreds of other people who were Nickel semifinalists, and this manager, I guess, was just going through the list. And they asked for my script. I sent it over, and they signed me. So, crazy. But what I would say is, if you're a semifinalist, there may be a reason you're a semifinalist as opposed to a finalist, or a fellow. You might need to do some more development on your script. So, with all due respect to Sal, while I agree with that piece of advice, I would also caution your script might not be ready.
And let me also quickly summarize essentially what we just said here, which is you can be your own advocate. You can email people. You can write your own cover letters. And by the way, let me also mention that you can run those cover letters by us for free, and we will give you our input. And I'm always surprised that not more people avail themselves of this service. It's free, people. You do want to put your best foot forward. So if you have a cover letter you need to run by us, go ahead and do it.
All right, so if you want to sell a spec, so this is the way you get the attention of industry, and we cover this in detail in some of our some of our other webinars, particularly the How to Score Representation webinar, which is up on coverageinc.com. Just click on the webinars page. We spend like a whole hour and a half just on this topic. But in general, to get into play the spec game, you are going to need to have some sort of representation at some point. But to get in the first place, there are places or ways to do it, like Virtual Pitch Fest, Stage 32, Roadmap Writers. These are all companies that for a fee will give you a certain amount of access. You can pitch directly to people in Hollywood through Virtual Pitch Fest. Well, it's more of a query letter. You can pitch directly to agents and managers and producers with Stage 32. Roadmap Writers, I think they tell you they'll reach like your first 10 pages or something. I don't know exactly, but I know a guy who got signed from Roadmap, and he's doing quite well with his new manager right now. So, so they're legit. Contests that the industry pays attention to. Of course, you should be entering contests, and of course, you should only be entering the ones that have actual value. Don't waste your time on the South Pacoima screenplay contest and film festival. Nobody cares, but if it's the Nickel, the Page, Scriptapalooza, Austin, yes, exactly. Yeah, I mean, we all know who these are. Final Draft. There's only like 10 of them that anybody actually cares about or pays attention to. And the studios, not the studios, sorry, the management and production companies actually track the big contests. They have interns and assistants whose job it is to, get all this data and put it on a grid and read this stuff. I mean, that's what they're doing. So in order to hit their radar, you have to hit a certain tier within the prestige contests.
So speaking, hang on because we have a couple of quick questions from people. First, about calling card scripts. Which is a better calling card, writing a spec, a novel, a comic book, or a graphic novel?
Huh.
Well, I mean, you can create your own IP. So there is, I think there is a lot of value in creating your own IP. I mean, an agent is not going to, or a manager is not going to be normally, if they're screenplay managers and literary agents, they're normally not going to really look at, gee, I have an original novel here. However, if you write the novel and then you adapt the novel into a screenplay, you can go in and you can say, well, this is my screenplay, and it's adapted from a novel that I also wrote. I mean, at least it shows people that you indeed can finish a story. You can write a story from beginning, middle, and end. And of course, the writing still needs to be good.
The key word here is successful. If it's a successful novel, if it is a successful graphic novel or comic book, if it's something that you self-publish, no one's going to care. It doesn't mean it's not a great piece of work, but it just, in order for the industry to care, to use it as a calling card, it needs to be something that already has an audience. Whereas that's not necessarily true with a spec script. You could be coming in cold. Of course, if it is based on a successful piece of material, so much the better. That just means that people are going to be way more interested in it from jump. But let's say you create and self-publish your own comic book, and you pay Blue Water, for example, to put it out for you, and it sells 50,000 copies. You know what? You've got something there. So, if you've got the money and the time, roll the dice.
Absolutely. Okay, one more quick question about really an industry attachment. So the question is, a well-connected producer raved about my biopic script, built a pitch deck, advertising, etc., then disappeared. I then, a month later, received an order rejection from Inktip. What do you suggest? So basically, I think you had someone who had a big mouth and did a lot of stuff, then realized he couldn't come through and then just disappeared.
I hope this producer didn't charge you for the time and effort to create this pitch deck, because if so, then it's a scam. Otherwise, it just sounds like the person's a flake, I hate to say.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing is, there's many flakes in this business. That's really one of the biggest problems with this business, the people in it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So sorry this happened to you, but there are a lot of flakes out there, and there's not necessarily a heck of a lot you can do about that.
Yeah,
All
you
right.
should also never be paying. You should never be paying producers or managers or to do things like that for you. Like it's just that's a good sign right there that it's a scam.
All right, let's get through this page real quick because we're already running late.
Yeah.
So again, the other ways to get stuff out there that you can see them right there on this list: Connections, DIY, Spec Scout, Pitch Fest. Well, these are all ways to get the attention of the industry. And if things work properly, the cream should rise. It doesn't mean that it always does. It's frustrating, I know, because people just sometimes you just can have a great script and people will not acknowledge it. Which is why you need to have multiple at bats. If it doesn't work on this one, be ready with the next one. If your material is awesome, you should be able to get some sort of industry attention. Okay. Once you get repped, do everything the rep tells you to do. Be that easy to work with person. You're probably going to need to do drafts for your new manager. You need to smile and say, "Thank you, sir. May I have another?" Then you're going to need to do drafts for an agent when that person comes to board. You're going to need to do drafts for a producer when that producer comes on board. Not to mention, if the thing sells, you're going to need to do more drafts at that point, depending on how many steps are in your deal, or they may just fire you. But whatever it is, you just have to be cool about it. Remember, this is your trial by fire. If you freak out because of people asking you to do more drafts and your check hasn't come yet, you might do something really stupid and say the wrong thing to somebody and jeopardize your career. You remember, they are looking for someone who is happy to show up for work every day, even if it means your roof is leaking and there's no way for you to pay for it. You just have to smile and say, "It's all good, man." Uh, and I put the Good in a Room graphic down there. Stephanie Palmer is a good friend of Coverage Inc. She's amazing. And, if you haven't read her book, please read it. But being good in a room, and this will sort of bring us to the Sal portion of our programming here, being good in a room and being able to pitch your follow-up projects is just as important, because remember, most specs don't sell. So the whole purpose of these specs is, to get you into the room for the bottled water tour. And once you're in that room, people are going to say, "I really liked your script, but it's too bad we can't do anything with it here. What else have you got?" And that's where you go to work.
Absolutely. And that brings us to selling a
So,
pitch.
so you want to sell a pitch. So Sal, who gets to pitch? How did you get to pitch? How did you
Okay,
actually
so
get to go into a room
yeah,
and
yeah.
sell your project?
I will give the 2-minute version of the long story. So our spec that everybody loved didn't sell for whatever reason, almost came close to 2 different major studios. Pretty depressing. About 5 or 6 days go by, my phone rings. It's my manager, and he says the same producer we took it out with really loves you guys because we did a draft for him in like 8 days. We're really fast. And he said he has an idea. So we got on the phone with him 2 days later, and he says he basically wants to set some kind of a horror movie in the Vatican. And that's all he said he had. Okay, cool. Thank you for the opportunity. I locked myself in my office for 2-3 days. We came up with a very high concept take on this low budget, high concept thing. We called him back a couple days later. He said, "I love it." He said, "Work up a 4-page document to see if we have something there." We wrote a 4-page, what they call a 4-pager, just a very brief treatment of what this looks like. He said he and his producing partner said they love it. Do this, and this tweak. All this is for free, of course. And then he says, "I want to start taking it around town." So basically 25 days after he gave us the idea, we were in rooms at, I think, 11 buyers, major companies, Paramount, Universal, MGM, yada, 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 right? And we did a 22-minute oral retelling of our story, the big beats, right? Which was extremely labor intensive for my writing partner and I. Before we pitched the first person, he and I had practiced that 20-minute pitch 37 times. So 37 times we did a 20-minute thing. So by the end of it, we could go off note. We didn't need notes. We're both kind of pretty good in the room, and some people engaged with us. Some people had a lot of questions. Some people said thanks for your time, and then just left the room. But we were getting a lot of good feedback. They were calling the reps and our producer in between them. we had a good feeling it would sell, and Paramount ended up picking it up. But it was, I'll say this, and I didn't know this before, being performative is very exhausting. It only says it doesn't sound like a lot, it only sounds like 20 minutes, but we had to have every beat, and you have to have these little catchphrases that you say at the right time, and you have to play off each other. And then you come down from it, you have to go grab a coffee or a lunch, and then you go to do the next one across town, and then you would completely collapse at night. But it was extremely quick. I guess a month from that first meeting to when we sold it, which I'm told doesn't really happen. Uh, uh, and the hardest part for my writing partner and I, which I guess is kind of the hardest part for everybody, is breaking a story. I don't want to say the screenwriting is easy, but when you have a story that you've already broken, it's a lot easier. And you have to break story for the pitches. You can't just give the couple of big beats. We had every beat broken out, which I didn't know you had to do. It was very labor intensive.
And this is something, let me just jump in, because a lot of people kind of misunderstanding about the pitching process. They think it's sort of a shortcut. And frankly, yeah, I think it's just as much, if not work. You need to know that story inside and out, because they are going to ask you a lot of detailed questions that you probably have never thought of, and you're going to need to think fast if you haven't come up with something yet. They expect like you to have written the script in your head. Yes. Is what it comes down to. And the other thing that goes back to what you're saying, Sal, is the performance aspect of it. We used to call it the dog and pony show, which is, even though these people have read, in theory, what you've sent over to them, they expect you to perform the entire thing to them like a fucking play. Like you go in there and it's like, oh, now it's time for story hour, and basically do the whole jumping around the room and getting them excited, getting them hyped on this fucking thing that they should have already read, because that's what's expected. God, I hate that.
Yeah, the thing that I just never knew is they want every beat broken out, but yet told conversationally, and they also want enough not colored in so that they can have some skin in the game and color their own way. But again, as this first time for me, not the big thing for me was just you have to have it broken. You just can't go in there and say the 30, the 60, and the 90-page beats. You have to, it was exhausting. I mean, I would collapse at 6 o'clock at night and then get ready for the next round of meetings the next day, but it was a 5 or 6 day thing, 2 a day, So
there was no need for a pitch deck.
We talked about that. They thought it would be too labor intensive in the amount of time that we had. That would have added another 2 weeks to work up. And I think that that was on the table, frankly, and then they heard us do a first dry run, and they're like, you guys don't need a pitch deck. You're just pretty good together. But yeah, I guess, and then, by the way, I was there a month ago into LA. I don't live in LA. I was there a month ago, and I'd met a friend who's about to go out, a major A-list writer who has written some of the movies that you guys have seen, A-list movies, and he's kind of bashful in the room, so he has to use a PowerPoint presentation because he just doesn't have the in the room skills, and there's, I guess my point, Jim, is that there's 1,000 ways to get across the finish line.
Yep, absolutely. And
let me quickly jump in here, just because I'm good at pitching. What they're really looking for is they want you to tell them a story. They want you to engage them. Yes. They want you to come across as personable and enthusiastic and easy to work with. So what actually also helps is if you practice your pitch before going in, just so you're comfortable.
Yep.
Yeah, my writing group is full of working writers, and they're always bringing in their pitches to work on. Like that's half of what we do these days.
I would say that the last advice I would give is, I think Jim had this earlier, was that before we got into the room, we wrote out 10 questions. We anticipated their questions and had those answers sort of memorized, but not memorized like stiff and stale, memorized in a colloquial, conversational way. But we knew, well, if they like that plot point, they're going to ask this question. And wouldn't you know it, 6 of the 11 asked almost questions that we had preconceived they would ask. So we were ready.
Right. That's great.
Awesome. So before we move on to the next one, let me just answer a quick question, which is yes, of course, if you have, again, if you have a pitch you want us to look at or a cover letter you want us to look at, just shoot us an email and we will give you our take on that.
Well, but
Uh,
a pitch, you know, if someone sends along a 4-page pitch, we have to charge for that. But cover letters, yes.
which are usually just only one page. But yes,
Exactly.
if it's anything, anything we can do in under half an hour, of course, we will do for free. Anything over, we have to charge hourly rate. But yes, you can just shoot us an email at
So,
coveraginc@gmail.com.
so let's wrap it all up. So
All right,
CI's top 10 tips for getting into the spec game.
go for it.
Focus on writing in a similar style, genre, or voice. That becomes your brand. Okay, so you
Okay, I
want to.
think we have to explain that because sometimes what happens is that you have a writer who has a romantic comedy, a horror spec, and an action piece, and then it can confuse people. It's like, okay, what do I sell this person as?
So Sal, you just recently sent over a couple of follow-up pitches, and I noticed that they had a similar sort of tone or style to all of them, which I thought was brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, you're in a corner, and they don't care that you're also funny and can do stand-up comedy. We are horror guys now, and we will be for at least till we write something that gets us out of that corner. It's a good problem to have.
Yeah. So, but that's what they're looking for. They're looking to brand you as the blank guy or the blank gal. And whatever is your brand, you need to own that and do it well and love it and embrace it. And don't be like, well, I'm the horror guy, but what I really want to do is stand up, because no one's going to know what to do with you. You have to earn the right to diversify.
Yes, yes.
Research producers who've done this sort of movie before, then contact the lowest rung person on the totem pole of that company. There are ones who, read, they're the ones who read, there's a typo, who Joe. They're the ones who read and need to put feathers in their cap. So, you can find all these similar types of movies on Netflix or IMDb Pro or online, whatever. Just go to your local video store if that still exists. And make sure your query is tight and razor sharp. It's amazing. People say query letters never work. They work for me. If you know how to do it, you just need to understand that people are going to give you 10 or 15 seconds, and you need to sell yourself in 10 or 15 seconds. It's like a radio spot. You just need to hit them hard with the information they need and prove that you know what you're doing and you're professional. And look, the interns, the assistants, these are the people who need to put feathers in their cap. They're looking for material to find and champion that they can discover and earn points at their company. They will read it if it's interesting or captivating. Most of the queries that come in are either too long, they're overwritten, there's just nothing snappy or captivating about them. If the query doesn't do it, that's a pretty good indication that the material is not going to do it either. Cultivate the relationships with the assistants and the interns, because they will be development execs and managers and agents in a year. So get in while they're early. They might be building a list already. I've seen this time and again. Someone who is actually like an assistant on an agent's desk, but they've got their own list of hip pockets who, as soon as they get promoted, they're going to be clients. That's a great
Exactly.
great way
Exactly.
in the door.
Let me quickly jump in here. That also means don't ever be rude to the receptionist or the assistant at an office, because in 6 months, you will want they will, yeah, you'll want to be in their good graces.
Yeah, no, those are the people you want to talk to. Those are the people you want to be friends with. Absolutely. A smaller, passionate agency or manager, in my experience, way better than some hotshot 3-letter who's not going to give a crap about you, where you're just one name on a list. Far better to have someone who's actually going to bring some hustle for you, going to go through 7 drafts with you, than someone who's just going to send something out and go, well, I sent it out, nothing happened. Contact me when you got something new.
Absolutely. So also understand what the industry cares about in terms of contests, options, deals, producers, and festivals. In other words, if you've won at the Oshkosh, Wisconsin County Fair Screenplay Festival, simply put, they're not going to care.
Yeah, there are definitely things that hit Hollywood's radar and things that don't. Like a $1 option. I've had people send query letters to me before to read, like, bragging about that they scored a $1 option with some no-name producer, and now, please sign me, Mr. Agent at CAA. And sorry, it's not going to happen. They don't care. They really don't care. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying that that's not a good thing. It is a good thing. Keep working it and see what you can do with it, but it's not going to hit Hollywood's radar. What Hollywood cares about are, things like Blacklist, Sundance, Austin. These are the things where Hollywood finds people, and of course referrals. If you're working with a producer, if you found a producer who develops a piece of material with you through a query, then that when it's time, that producer will send out the material and put his or her clout behind it.
Yeah, in general, it's all about third-party validation because in this city, nobody knows what's working and what's not working, and they're all afraid to say yes to something that's not going to work because that could cost them their job. So it's a lot easier and a lot safer for them to say no. So one way to get them to say yes is if we make it an easy yes. In other words, here is a lot of third-party validation.
Yep,
This
exactly.
amazing contest or has said, yes, this is a good writer, this is a good script. And that's where that comes in.
Cross collateralize the hype. What does that mean? So that means as soon as something good is happening on anything that you're doing, let everybody know about it. Okay, that's a great opportunity. Let's say you've got a couple of scripts out that you've sent out yourself. You're not represented, but let's say you've sent out some queries and you've gotten 3 bites. So your script is now into 3 different production companies, right? And something happens, like you hit the semifinals of the nickel, like the questioner before, right? You immediately email or call those people that your script is into and say, hey, just wanted to spread the good news that this has just happened. This will freshen you up in their minds. You'll go to the top of the pile. Let everyone know what's going on. And if someone is interested, only if it's real interest, not fake interest, but if someone is interested, tell everybody, because people can tend to be much more excited in Hollywood when they think that someone else is excited about it.
Right. Right. Plus, writers are terrible. We're terrible at cheerleading for ourselves, and we all need to be better at that.
Yeah, it's true. But you really do need to be your own representative. Even after you get signed, it's still you have to keep hustling for yourself. Don't expect someone else is going to carry all that weight for you. Listen to and work with your manager, incorporate his or her ideas. This is crucial. Once you actually get someone on board, they will work so much harder for you if they feel invested in your material. The way you do that is you say, so what do you think? Tell me your ideas. And then when they tell you your ideas, do your best to incorporate them and say, I never thought about it that way. Let me see what I can do with that. And then make it happen. If they see that you've actually listened to them, they will have skin in the game, and they will work that much harder for you, because when they call up someone to say and tell them about your project, they'll be able to say, yeah, so I developed this with him. Yeah, so this was partly my idea. It may not even be true, but who cares? The main thing is you want that person to be working as hard for you as they would for themselves if it was their own project. And you do that by making them truly a part of your team. You listen to them. And if you blow them off, guess what? They ain't going to do shit for you. Spend a lot of time developing other great ideas. This is, again, crucial, because when you do get that bottled water tour after your spec goes out and it doesn't sell, they're going to say, tell us your ideas. You need to have 4 or 5 other ideas, preferably in a similar genre or tone or style or voice to what they've just read, that hopefully they can bite on. Now, Sal, you just spent time doing exactly this. I saw your list of follow-up pitches and they were great. This is a perfect example of how to do exactly that. So tell me, what was the thought process? Did you guys actually just sit down and say, okay,
We
we're
have
going to need some follow-up pitches?
we just consider ourselves a factory, and frankly, we have a goal to ourselves to come up with 30 new log lines a quarter. So that's 120 a year, and maybe
Wow. That's
law of averages, 10 of them are good, 5 of them become something. Um, so that list you saw, Jim, there's probably 60 that are just a little bit less good. Uh, uh, Jeffrey Katzenberg in the 90s said, idea is everything. Concept is king. And so you just
Yep.
have to keep generating ideas. And, we do, I literally have a quarterly thing. We just trade emails and we get to 30, and, not all of them are good. They're half ideas, but then you marry this idea from June of 18 with this idea from January of 19, and then you have it.
Yep. As it
Uh,
says right here, they want idea machines. They don't want just a single piece of business. They don't want just a spec. They don't want just, a pitch that they buy. They want to know that you are someone who is going to continue to generate revenue over a lifetime.
Absolutely. And let me jump in and talk about a mistake that some writers sometimes make, and it's a terrible mistake, which is writing on the same piece of material for years and years and years. And again, you absolutely should do draft after draft after draft, because they usually don't get good until you're somewhere at draft number 20. Of course, you should do that. However, what you should not do, spend 5, 10, 15 years on the same piece of material. You need to work on other material as well. You cannot just rely on having, all of your eggs in one basket. Number one, that's not what they want. They want people who have many, 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 many good scripts, many, many, many good ideas. And also, number two, for your own sanity, if you have all of your eggs in one basket, if you have this one and only this one script, if something goes wrong with this one script, which it will, there will be plenty of contests, you're not even going to make it to the quarterfinals, it will be terrible for you, not only career-wise, but also psychologically. So just keep writing.
Yeah, true that.
All right, moving on. Don't waste you or anyone else's time trying to market a script with a soft concept or one that just isn't getting the reaction you hope for. Move on.
Well, that
Yes,
goes right back to what you were just saying, Tanya. So yeah, no,
absolutely.
I mean, and we see this over and over again here. Look, you do not evolve as a writer unless you are writing new material. The things that you're struggling with in the current script, when you start a new script, you've already learned from the struggle of the previous one. You might not make that same mistake again. So every time you start a new piece of material, you are starting it from a place of strength versus where we're at with the previous piece of material. Not to mention the fact that you should be an idea machine and cranking out lots of story ideas. It's simply that your writing craft improves every single time you start something new.
Right.
Absolutely. And until and even after you get an agent or a manager, you are your sales rep. As we've talked about before, nobody's stopping you from finding email addresses and emailing people if you have something to say and something to sell.
Managers love this. When you actually, continue, don't just sit back and let them do everything. Of course, don't do anything that's going to like step on their toes. You always want to be in communication with them, but you want to be reaching out proactively and contacting producers and coming up with your own leads and information. You have to be your own representative all the time, because even if you have the best representative in the world, they are only working for you a small percentage of their time every week.
Right. What I always heard was that, you're paying them 15%. That's how much work they need to be doing. So you are responsible for the other 85%.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, that's a good way of looking at it. So I think we've come to the Q&A portion. I mean, we've already answered all the questions that have come through. So if you have any more questions, find the question box. And also, if there are always any questions in between webinars, feel free to email us at coverageinc@gmail.com. We are happy to answer your questions.
I have
And
a
again,
question. I have a
yes.
question for Sal. So Sal, so what happens next?
Well, we will be commenced to write the draft, which we're going to working through very shortly, just some signing some legal documents. The one thing I think I would stress to the writers out there is that when you write for the big boys, studios, you don't have 18 months to write drafts like you might have before. You have 90 days. And what that really means is you have about 45, because you have to send a draft to your agent and your manager. They give you notes back. They do another draft. maybe again, this is all guilt stuff, and then another one, and then you send it in. So it's just it's speed, 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 speed. And then secondly, we're trying to capitalize on the heat from the sale and get another thing set up.
Right on. Keep
Cool.
those plates
So,
spinning.
yeah, absolutely. So, here's a good question. What goes into a cover letter?
An ideal cover letter should have 3 paragraphs. First paragraph is your introductory paragraph where you say a little bit about yourself. What is compelling, fascinating, different about you? Why are you a person who is worth them spending a couple of minutes getting to know or having a beer with? Something about your life experience. Why are you the ideal person to write this screenplay? It's not necessarily about I've won this contest or your screenwriting credentials. It's really more about what makes you a fascinating person. This is what I generally advise. The second paragraph is your pitch. It should be short, a log line or possibly a little bit longer than a log line, just a couple of sentences. You want to keep it short and sweet. You don't want to tell the whole story. Again, you've got 15 seconds. All right. It needs to be something people can look at immediately and understand that there are very few words on this page. I guess I'll read the whole thing. And the final paragraph is just, again, reiterating, hey, thank you so much. Would love to send this along. And if you have some witty closer that is like a callback to what you said about yourself in the first paragraph, put it there, because then they'll understand that you are a storyteller. You have a beginning, you have a middle, and you have an end, and you just wrapped it up and put a nice bow on it. That is a compelling query letter. And if you can do that in 3 paragraphs, let's say no more than 100, 150 words, can be read in 10 to 15 seconds, you've got a strong chance of getting someone's attention. And by the way, of course, it goes without saying that your logline or pitch should be really cool and different and interesting as well, because if it isn't,
Oh, and let me just quickly jump in about that first paragraph about yourself. What a lot of writers always seem to forget is that they indeed are interesting because they've had life experience, and a lot of people don't. A lot of writers, at least, always seem to want to negate that. If you've had a prior career or you're currently having an interesting job, use that. Use that. People will want that. I mean, there are so many former attorneys or prosecutors or cops who are now writing all over the city, and that's how they got in, by saying, hi, this is our experience.
yeah, and don't negate or denigrate whatever it is that you do, even if you don't think that much of it. I got a query once, like a decade or so ago, from a guy who was a plumber, and he didn't seem to think that the fact that he was a plumber had any validity. He didn't want to even mention it, except for the fact that his story was about a plumber where the guy finds a finger like clogged in a drain with a mafia boss's ring on it, and the next thing the guy knows, like, he's on the run from the mob, and he's like, I don't even remember what the story was about, but basically the fact that the guy was a plumber was great. It was exactly what you need to tell that story. So bring it, whatever you've got, own it.
Absolutely. We have a couple of more questions about cover letters. So, first question is, does it matter what day of the week you send out emails and make calls? And does it matter if you're using Yahoo or Gmail?
Anna, you have any feelings on that one?
I don't think your email address matters, although, you want to use something reliable. That's all. I wouldn't send anything out on a Monday or a Friday, actually, just because emails tend to get so clogged with, on Fridays, they get clogged with assistants who have piles of scripts to read over the weekend. And on Mondays, everybody's just too hungover from the weekend to deal with it. So if I need to email somebody new, I tend to email them right kind of smack in the middle of the week. But
Yeah.
that might totally be a lie. Like, that's just how I've always done it.
Yeah, no, that's correct. Stay away from Monday.
Cool. Okay, a couple of more questions. Again, regarding cover letters, should one include poster art in a cover letter or other visual things?
No, absolutely not. No attachments, nothing that those will be immediately deleted as spam.
Yep. Yep. All right. If there are no more questions, Again, remember, you can always email us if you have any questions between webinars. We will always answer your questions. We will never charge for answering your questions. And the same goes for cover letters. Run them by us. We will give you our feedback. And again, you don't want to send out a half-cooked cover letter. That's the first thing people will see or know about you. So feel free to run those past us.
And don't forget, Get Rep Now deadline, October 20th, folks. We've only got a couple of weeks left. So
hang on. We have one more final question. Do you send the query letter prior to sending the script, or do you attach them together?
Oh my God, no, you never send a script with a query letter. No, the query letter, they will tell you if they want to read your script. That's what the query letter is for. Don't ever send an attachment to anyone cold. You will be deleted. It'll go right to their spam folder. You will not be read, okay? The whole point of the query letter is to prove that you are worth their time to read more than a few paragraphs.
Absolutely. So again, thank you for being here. Thank you, Sal. Thank you, Anna. You guys rock.
Yeah. Thank you, guys.
Thank you for having me. Honored.
And again, you can always get in touch with us with questions, with feedback. Also, if there is anything you would like us to cover in a future webinar, feel free to email that to us as well. So thank you so much, everyone.
Peace out.
Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.